mentioned, we're going to have some fun around a very serious subject as we bring up these roundtable guests for a very interactive discussion and really some future gazing about a big challenge and really a nightmare, actually, that materialized for the industry here in Alberta over the past years. So our topic, the title is It Possible? And we're all about managing poultry in a post-AI world. And all of our panelists are probably familiar faces to most of you. We have, of course, JP, who we heard from earlier today. We have Dr. Taryn Gerard, U of A graduate, and then she got her Master of Science in Poultry Ethology and focusing on animal welfare, and then got her DVM at the U of C. So she is truly unbiased. I probably should live in Red Deer. Well, at least you work some in Red Deer when you've been at school in both Edmonton and Calgary. And she has won numerous awards, including the top 4 under 40 from Canadian Poultry, and has done a lot of teaching as well at both of her alma maters in the province. And we are also pleased to have with us Mike Froese. Mike's an organic layer producer and farms south of Camrose, also a technical representative for Burn Bray Farms, and has had firsthand experience with our topic. And really this whole discussion comes out of conversations with a producer that posed many questions and blue sky ideas around HPAI, highly pathogenic avian influenza. And so we want to talk about the things that matter to you in this whole issue. And don't forget, you can join us through Slido. So I think we'll start. I'm just going to chat with each of them individually to start with. But JP, we had some questions from this morning on Slido for you, and just kind of wanted to follow up. People were asking a little bit about, you know, there was fears about this spring being bad, and that didn't really materialize. So was that weather related, you know, from how dry things were in North America, or were there less birds migrating? Can you talk a little bit about this spring's conditions versus what we feared?
I don't know much about that per se, but I can tell you that the specialists, the experts in wildlife, their biggest interest is to figure out the immunity of the wild birds, because what they think might be going on is that the birds that went down south got in contact with the virus, the ones that survived and all that got immunity, and on their way back up, they're shedding less virus, and that might have an impact on the contamination of the environment. I talked to David Swain, who's a guy who's done his entire career with avian influenza. He's got over 400 publications on that. And when I asked him about this, he referred me to another researcher, and this at the University of Georgia was telling me that they're working on it. They don't know for sure. So we didn't know what to expect. We have less right now, and we're in June. We were told that migration had been delayed. To be clear, I don't know why. Now, is that really these two factors? Are they playing? I don't think anybody knows. And of course, we're looking at the fall to see if the trend will stay this way. But one thing to keep in mind, we should not relax during the summer. I'll remind you that in Italy, their biggest outbreaks that happened between June and November. Okay, it makes absolutely no sense. And I went there, asked them, they don't know how this happened. So we're still learning a lot about this virus. As I said, it's a game changer.
Natural immunity, if that was happening, that would be important that we could sort of follow up and maybe figure out how that happened, couldn't we?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's what we're hoping, but they need to test, take blood samples. It's not an easy thing to assess. As I mentioned, in Rome, they indicated that 274 different species of birds were known to be infected and affected by the virus so far. That's something we've never seen before.
Mike, I want to follow up a little bit out of that and check in with you. In this time then, when we have maybe a little less activity, do you feel that there are things that we should be doing to gear up for the next time? Because is it a matter of not if, but when?
No, I think we should just sleep and bury our heads in the sand. Okay, so no, we should not sleep on this. We should be, I've suggested to our board that we should have some kind of a standing committee that deals with the different topics or different things that we should be thinking about for the next time. I mean, immediately after we got hit, I was like, be great if we had different templates to know how to deal with this for depopulation, because a lot of people were in the situation where, you know, the word on the street was, you got to leave your birds in the barn. And well, it's kind of true, but kind of not true. It's really comes up to a plan, like how are you going to dispose of them? And so the board was super awesome at getting a number of different plans together for other producers that got hit, and that helped towards the end of the year. But then there's other issues, things like, hey, you know what? We should really look at how this travels. Like, I know it's biosecurity. We gotta really make sure we keep well on top of our footwear and machinery. But what about how we manage air? And I know in Nova Scotia, we had that conversation. Was that in February or so? It was in February. And we had, actually, JP and I had a talk about the whole air issue and how avian can travel. And that's when you dug into the literature and said, hey, wait a minute, there might be something here and we should take a look at the data. And that I wanted to say before, when I was standing in the back, I was going to say, wow, thank you for looking into this, because for so many of us, we heard, no, it has nothing to do with, you know, it traveling on debris in the air at all. It's all just biosecurity. You better step it up, you farmers. And it's like, that can't be the only thing. So all that, I'll bring it back. There are things we should do. We should think about how to manage it in the future. We should think outside the box and how it travels. And we should have a standing committee that is dealing with these things. So the next time around, it's just like, bang, we're ready to go. There you go.
You know, we talked earlier this morning and started talking about resiliency, and Taryn, you know, you have spent a lot of your career working with animal welfare, but this issue took in a lot of human welfare as well. Like, what are some of the other drains and considerations around the impact that this disease has had that maybe are overlooked in our concern for the birds, but does it go beyond just the birds?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. It was a very clear picture of the resiliency of the poultry industry. But it also really showed some negative effects of this. So in the beginning, people were worried about what their neighbors thought of them when they would get AI. They were worried about what the other producers thought of them. And the mental health implications of going through, like when we did have a protocol, right? Then we had the steps laid out, but then the farmers weren't sleeping because they were doing everything to try and get through it as fast as they could. And so the implications of that were really brutal. The guys in the beginning that got it, that didn't have those protocols in front of them, really spun their wheels trying to figure out what to do and how to go through that. So as we came together as an industry, it did show the resiliency, but it showed where we need to focus. And then the other part too, that it was quite shocking to me. It shouldn't have been, but I spoke about the mental health implications of avian influenza on the poultry industry. And I talked about producers and what they had been through and how we tried to support them and how we can support producers better. But I also briefly touched on, like, you know, like the feed consultants now, they don't know how to help, or the people that are in the 2 weeks in the barn, the 2 weeks before the positive, now they're investigated. I was one of those people, and thinking for that hot minute when the CFIA is asking you a million questions about your biosecurity and where you were before and where you were after, and who did you talk to, and did you wash your car, and did you do this and this and this, and you're like, did I do this? And so the stress of all of that, and I started to just touch on how people in the industry were affected outside of the producers that were going through it. And after that conference, I had 3 people come up to me, 3 grown men that I had never met before. And they separately, the 3 of them were very emotional, talking about how when they had gone through avian influenza previously in previous years in different provinces, and one had lost his job because there wasn't enough business for him. And so he moved to another province. And when he moved to another province, his wife and kids didn't transition well, and he ended up getting a divorce. And he blames that back on avian influenza. And another guy had talked about the depression he felt seeing what the producers were going through and how he had to go to therapy for that. So there was outside effects of avian influenza that I had touched on without even knowing it. And then looking what it did to our team too. Like I had to step back and learn how to be a leader because that also is affected. So I think what I'm trying to say is there's just so much more of this mental health implications of an intense disease that requires depopulation that I had no idea about.
Mike, you're nodding your head.
Love to add to this. I mean, this is unfortunately, I've been through a few diseases on the farm. So, I mean, I think if one goes through the disease the first time, those are the people that say, oh no, it's something I did, or how are people looking at me, because you've never been through it. If you've been through it before, you know that's not the case, but there's so many burdens. One of the burdens especially is you got to move fast at the beginning, and that whole tired aspect, like being able to move quickly and having a proper plan in place, that's really tough. And then the burden of paperwork. I know there are guys here and ladies here who've helped and worked through it. And it's just, I'm not kidding when I say the paperwork mountain just to get paid was probably a stack, maybe like that thick. And it wasn't like I just sat down one afternoon and it's like, I'm going to get this done. It's like, oh, you mean you need this? Well, I got to go find those documents. Oh, but I need to clean and I got to wash. Oh, and I need to get this meeting done. And oh, I still have another job. And just the onerousness, I don't know if that's a word, the onerousness of this mounting expectation that we're going to write books in addition to doing the physical labor is we've got to figure a way through this because it's starting to burn people out.
And we talked about the importance of burnout and the risk of that as well. Dr. JP, I'm going to come back to you. We had several questions this morning about following up a little bit about like what Taryn said. You know, is spraying your tires just before entering a farm effective at reducing viral load, or is that basically like your foot bath, phobia? You don't want those. And what about vehicles that have to travel between farms and can't fully wash between visits? And what about service industry people? We have had several questions in about that. So maybe can you touch on that area?
Yeah, well, yes. Putting a little spray on tires may make you feel good. And that's nothing, but it does not do much to as far as decontamination. The Italians came up recently with a new rule. All the farms need to be equipped with disinfecting arch. So and that's expensive. Well, expensive. I think it was 25,000 euros or something like that.
What is it?
Is it? That's expensive.
No, what is it?
It's an arch that trucks will go through, and it will send disinfectant, high pressure, to decontaminate the entire truck. Okay, and I've been on a farm where the guy and it's a rich people in this case. They had like spray coming from the ground. I don't know how much this cost, but it was very spectacular. I've got a video if you're interested. But there's no data virtually on this. Okay. So is it worthless if you go that far? I don't know that. It's probably helpful if you do have, some kind of pressure a disinfectant, with some pressure that may help, but to just put with this little handheld thing, no, it does absolutely nothing. So I would not go in that direction. Now I realize, and you're not going to hear me say you need to park 100 meters from the barn, okay, because I've never done it. Okay, life's too short. And we have winter in Canada on top of that. I mean, who wants to risk so but there's stuff you can do. First of all, you don't want to park just next to the air outlet, to contaminate the vehicle. The emphasis should be for if you go inside, how you're going to do it. Okay. But as far as vehicle contamination, there are several things to consider. I was talking about regional biosecurity. You can have segregation of routes for some vehicles that will go some farms in a certain order depending on health status and stuff like that. Having space when you park vehicles from different origins, I may say, because what we've seen at slaughter plants is there's cross-contamination there. There's studies that have been done recently looking at the when trucks are moving, how the air around the trucks are going to have an impact on dispersing potential pathogens. Okay. And if you have a truck, for example, we know that there's two areas in a truck where there's a lot of activity between the cab and the trailer and at the end of the trailer. That's quite spectacular. And in fact, between the cab and the trailer, it will coat the side of the cab. So it will likely contaminate where the person, like with the door and stuff like that. So you need to be, if you cannot decontaminate, ideally you will want to go to a truck wash or, a commercial thing and let dry a vehicle. That's ideal. But if you cannot do that, at the very least, you want to be careful about where you will park. You'll be at proximity of the barn, but certainly not close to the air outlet.
Mike, you want to?
I just have a quick question for you then. So when the trucks show up to pick up eggs or chickens or whatever, and they spray the tires, useless, right?
Yeah.
Useless. Okay.
Pretty much.
But if you're to, like, say, maybe wipe down the handles, or maybe wear gloves when you're handling the door latches, that would be more useful than spraying tires, or what are you saying?
Yeah, in the sense that if it will avoid contamination of like the door where you of the barn, I would think that could be potentially more useful than in North Carolina at one point, the service people, they had a system installed in their trucks where as they would get in, they would press a little something and you would have a spray that would go hit the tires. Okay. And it was cool, but really if
You need to hit the handles, really.
Yeah.
From what I understand, the door handles, not the tires.
Yeah, you better do that. You have a better chance of making a difference. But I would not spend time and effort. A vehicle will go on a highway, the heat generated by the friction, it can be quite spectacular, and that will do more to decontaminate a tire than to just spray. As a matter of fact, the spray adds liquid, which will dilute or allow organic material to just then be available to decontaminate. So to contaminate.
Taryn, you talked about leadership, and I guess that would have taken some coordination on the part of your team so that maybe you did different people going to different places, or you weren't going to more than one farm in a day. Tell us about some of those kinds of things.
I always feel guilty when we talk about this because it was honestly my team that did everything. I would get the phone call and then my team would disperse. Like they're all sitting over there and we would figure out who was the closest person to the site. We stopped flock health visits. So if we had birds brought into the postmortem room, then whoever cut that day wouldn't be on farm because we weren't doing flock health visits. We changed vehicles between either visit or each day as well. But we just kind of hunkered down and did so much testing. We were essentially testing every day. So we started hiring other people and training them so that then we could send out family members and husbands, which is uncomfortable, and send them out and teach them how to swab. So then we could still work with other producers. So it was a community event, but it was those girls over there that really carried the whole team.
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I'd like to add, I mean, this virus is not very resistant, right? So unless it's buried in organic material and it's cool. So the sun does a lot. Dryness in the sun will do a lot to decontaminate the vehicle. So if you can at least pressure wash to remove organic material, let things dry, that will do a lot to eliminate the vehicle as a source of contamination.
Here's an interesting question that just came in. I guess you could call it the old scarecrow question. Do you think scaring away wild birds helps avoid getting AI? Mike,
Well, I mean,
do you want to go out and flap away at the
the I mean,
cannons?
there are, you know, different ideas like using those cannons like they have in the Fraser Valley, or an old trusty shotgun or something like that. I mean, it's, I know last year when I had a flock of, say 6,000 snow geese in the field across from me eating peas, I don't know, like it's pretty tough to get rid of them, you know. If you really like that job and you're able to sit there 24/7 for about 2 months, it's probably a great idea. But if you can't do that and they do circle back and they do come back, then you have that bio load building up in fields close to you. I don't know. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, JP?
These birds, they have bird brains, but they're not that stupid. First of all, they're going to realize that you're just bluffing. That's the first thing. And so they'll get used to it and then ignore you. Now people have tried, there's a publication on using lasers. Okay. Airports, by the way, they use lasers to avoid, last thing you want when you're flying with a jet is to have a bird getting in the, in the engines. And so they're using lasers. They did that. France is a good lab because they have a lot of birds raised outside, and using lasers, they could reduce the presence of key wild birds, you know, like wild ducks and other types of birds like that, geese, by 99.8%. Okay, it was quite dramatic. So I don't know economically how doable that is, but I think some people have been talking about drones that could be used. There's a lot going on right now to try to deal with this situation. But I don't, you can try to scare them, but it's not going to last long.
All right. Let me follow up with one more question that came earlier. When using dry chlorine, since you talked about that being a better alternative, how often should it be replaced, and what would be kind of proper practice? What's protocols with some of the dry chlorine?
Yeah, well, the people who've been using it, they just put a couple of centimeters of dry chlorine. They don't, use a lot, and you need to put it so that you cannot avoid walking into it. Owen showed that normally you could replace it every 14 days or so. So that's basically it. I think a lot of the value of this is this powder is coating your boots. Okay. I think that's one benefit from it. And the fact that it's safe in the sense that if you would have a slippery floor, it's not like something wet. So that's about it. We don't have a lot of data other than the tests that were done. As far as I don't have a lot of experience with it or talk to growers who've been using it. I've seen it once in Burkina Faso when there was an egg layer operation, 270,000 birds, and they got the H5N1 that kills people, so they got really serious about it. They had people who died. And first of all, they had a compliance officer who was carrying a 9mm. That did a lot to get people to respect, at least it worked for me. I can tell you that. They were laughing at me because I was impressed by that. This is just a 9mm. Well, but they use a lot of that dry chlorine, and some will use lime, but I'm concerned about Lyme as far as heat generated and when you get water on it and all that.
I'm just going to follow up on a vaccination question. We talked a little bit about that option. And maybe Taryn, from a veterinary perspective, does the RNA vaccine for AI reduction transfer into the food chain through the vaccination of animals? And then could that transfer into humans? What's the specs so far on the vaccine that's out there?
So I'm going to say no, and then I'm going to pass it over to Dr. JP.
RNA is an acid that's destroyed at about 65, 70 degrees and 10, 15 minutes. Okay. So you could vaccinate animals with the kind of vaccine that you're concerned about, you know, the COVID vaccine. You're not going to, it's not like a virus that would go and invade you. Okay, it's just an acid that will be completely destroyed by the cooking process. So there's no way vaccinating with this kind of vaccine will translate into a problem in humans if we're talking vaccinating birds and feeding that to humans. Okay, I mean, there's no risk there.
Mike, as a producer, it must seem almost overwhelming when you think about, you know, we heard a lot of good things today about that, what can be done that helps. But, you know, are there some cost effective, you know, I mean, a lot of those things have a cost. And, you know, from a producer perspective, does it seem a little bit like, is there anything else we can do? Or is it just something we have to learn to live with? How do you justify all that?
We haven't learned to live with anything. Look at us. We have electricity. I ate today. We have cold water. We fix things as humans. Like, that's what we do, right? So when I hear people say things like, well, I sure hope I don't get avian, and they cross their fingers, I'm like, that's just crazy. Like, I don't hope I don't get it. I don't want to get it, but I'm going to do something about it. And we got to think about this. We got to put our heads together. And that's, I'm going to circle back to Nova Scotia again. You know, I felt like, you know, we weren't on the same page with some ideas when it came to, you know, transmission. And then this conference, I'm like, wow, we got lots to talk about. Like, I feel like just in a few months, you know, we thought about things. We thought about the problem, how it could be fixed, and maybe the fix doesn't actually have to cost a whole pile. We talked in the hallway about, you know, air filtration, and how there was a farm that realized they didn't need to put in that really expensive, I don't know what's it called, a HEPA filter or something like that, like very expensive. No, actually, you just need to put a cloth filter in front of it, and that'll be enough to catch the majority of the debris, which keeps the viral load low. And so once we just get beyond the fear and get beyond the I'll call it the ideology, the bureaucratic unwillingness to deal with the facts or to examine new facts, and to actually just talk about what maybe people found. Let's start with the anecdotes. What do you think works? What could work? Does that make sense? Where's the data to support that would actually help? And to start there and to look at the problem just like every single other problem. Like, I remember, I'll draw an example. Back in England, they didn't know how, I can't remember what the disease was. It was passed on and everyone was getting sick. I think was it type? Oh, I can't remember. Anyway, there was a disease and then nobody could figure out how they were getting it. And then they realized it was all because they were touching the same water pump and they're all pumping water. Was it cholera? So, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, we got dirty hands, man. We got to stop doing this and touching this pump. And they did that and people stopped getting sick and we figured it out. But I'm sure there are people saying things like, there's no way, as if by touching something that would make you sick. But until we figure things out, you know, anyway.
Another story I need to tell you. I mean, if you go back in the 19th century, 12% of women were dying of septicemia in childbirth. And they discovered that one big reason was that medical students were having labs, necropsy lab, looking at cadavers, and then going to help for the delivery of kids. And so somebody forced them to wash their hands And overnight, it went from 12% to 4%, which is still high. But and at that time, the medical community was really laughing at whoever recommended washing hands. So usually that's what happens. Somebody arrives with an idea, and we kind of go and say, "Oh my God," you know. And at the end of the day, sometimes it turns out to be the real thing. So we should not discard anything. But at the end of the day, you need data. I was giving a talk last week in Italy, and I had in front of me the people who came up with this rule that growers need to have this disinfecting arch. And I said, quite frankly, I don't know how good or bad that is. The problem is you don't either. Okay. And I think you got, well, I didn't say it this way, but you got balls to force growers to have that when you cannot prove that it actually works. So I think what we need to do is work at getting data for whatever we come up with, because, you know, once you have data, then you can discuss a lot more than just, I think, opinions.
So I think we are further ahead with getting ideas and or solutions that may not necessarily cost a whole pile. We just got to sit down. We got to talk about it. We got to figure it out. We got to look at the data and we got to do it.
Yeah, and that, I guess that's where things like the Poultry Innovation Partnership really come in as a place to do that and bringing experts together. Let's talk a bit about, you know, silver linings to these dark clouds. Taryn, what sorts of things have we advanced in as an industry because of having to go through this tough time? Are there things that we've learned that we're doing better now that are, you know, better overall for the industry, even though we had to learn to do it through AI?
Yeah, I think we came really far in a lot of ways. I think a lot of guys now have their disposal plans ready, so they're more prepared if they do get avian influenza. The emergency management team has come together and has those protocols that Mike is talking about, so that we had a suspect case a little while ago and he was like, what am I going to do? And I was like, it's all laid out for you. If you have it, it's going to be okay. There's a roadmap. It's not scary anymore. It's not fun and it's still exhausting, but it's not scary. It's not an unknown anymore. So I'll never forget the day that we got the phone call about the first few cases. IP2 and 3 were within 20 minutes of each other. And that was one of the worst days that I can remember. And so now when I get a suspect case, it's like, okay, we got this. This is what we need to do. We're going to do this. You're going to have your results by tomorrow and it's going to be okay. So I think that is probably the biggest thing. The other thing is seeing how we did come together as an industry, and the relationships and the bonds that formed as well. I think that's all really, really strong.
And Mike, yeah, what about your resilience factor and what things have you seen?
Sorry, the question, how did I survive?
Kind of like, yeah.
Oh man, how did I survive that one? Holidays, snaps, jujubes. I did talk about that before, but I can't stress enough how you got to take care of yourself. No one else is going to give you a nice little pat on the back if you burn out or lose your mind. All right. So if you find yourself in any situation, whether it's avian, salmonella, barn fire, it doesn't matter. You just got to stop. It's all going to work out. It will. Otherwise you're dead. Right. I mean, that is the option. You're dead or you work things out. So you're going to work it out. You need to take time. You need to take a nap. You need to have a way to just chill out and not get too uptight. And then in the long term, how did I survive this? Well, I mean, I had some very good people, egg farmers, that helped out with paperwork and such. I think we need to really, and this is bigger than AI. This is in every area: safety, AI. I mean, all the mountains and reams of papers that we're expected to push and talk about. We got to figure a better way of doing this. As farmers, we do a lot of talking. There's no problem with sitting down and talking to people, but there is a problem with sitting down and writing things out all the time, because that's not what we do. We gather eggs and move manure and drive tractors. And so I'd love, and this is, I don't even know where I'm going with this, but I do know I'm putting a plug for all us farmers. We got to find a better way of doing that stuff so we don't burn out in the long run again.
What about some other emergency planning? You know, I've heard other presentations about some of the other factors you don't think about, like what do you do about childcare and what do you do about, you know, employees and how do you reschedule them? And do we need emergency farm plans? And has AI sort of highlighted that we have to have some organizations, some steps in place for that as well?
Me?
Sure, anyone. I left that one sort of wide open.
Well, I mean, the colonies do most of the egg farming, so the total, you know, the structure is all there to make sure everyone eats and gets things washed and cleaned and fixed. So they don't have that. There's not a lot of us left on the outside, but in terms of what we needed to do, it's just making sure there's enough dough to get things going. We really needed to see some money fast so I could pay for stuff. And there's always a lag, especially when it comes to the government, much as we love them, right? It just takes time. Anyway, say the question one more time and I'll try to wrap up my thought.
Well, just about emergency farm planning, you know, having that network of support, having the numbers somewhere for who to call when, and
Okay.
having all that information in one easy to find
It's
place.
so funny. We all have these big plans and binders. And then when I found out I had AI, the first thing I did is I had a nap. And then I went and I looked again, we had it. So I just called Susan, help. And then she did everything else, got CFIA out and all that kind of stuff. So really, you might have all these numbers, but there's only two numbers I really ever use, 911 and Susan and our new general manager, Steven. So, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to add anything to any of that?
I would say one thing that we learned as being not producers and seeing our team or the feed consultants too, like that's where you can really step in. Like we started making meals, right? We had one client that got AI and their kids were just going back to school and they were just getting a house delivered to their yard and they got AI the day before both those things happened. So we made them meals, and then I made them, this is really helpful. I tell this all the time when I say I won't. I made them this chocolate cake for their kids that were going back to school. And they're like, oh, just put it in the house because the dog is outside. And I was like, okay, yeah. And so I put it in the house and put it on the kitchen table. And the dog broke into the house and ate the chocolate cake. And so if you don't know, like chocolate's poisonous to dogs. It didn't kill it, no, but it came close. I just had to get them to call a real vet. But I would say like that's where you can as industry people stepping up and bringing disinfectant, bringing them food or bringing them whatever they need, because the producers on the farm, as much as Mike says like take a break, you're not going to take a break. You don't know how to take a break, because the second you take a break you have to deal with the weight of what is going on. And so having somebody go and grab stuff for you is, I think, one of the most powerful things we could do. Just don't make anything chocolate.
Okay. JP?
Somebody, you mentioned the government, CFIA and all that. Anybody from CFIA here? They're not gonna admit it.
Open season.
No, yeah. You're from CFIA. Well, yeah. Oh, I'm not saying they're bad people, but and you know, I trained some of them. The Manon Rasco is basically reporting everything to the World Animal Health Organization. It was my PhD student. I work with them. As I said, I trained them. And the problem I don't think is at their level. But I've been going to several meetings in Ontario, out west, out east, and I don't see them. And I think they would benefit a lot from being in meetings like this one and listening to what I'm listening to, okay? And bringing this back to the leadership of the government of CFIA, because you talk about paperwork and all the complexity. It's not easy, and I'm not here to blame them for this, but I believe that if they would have a closer contact, because most of these CFIA people are not poultry people, okay? There's like two of them. One is about to retire. Another one used to work for Hybrid Turkeys. That's about it. And Manon Rasco is probably another quasi poultry person, but I didn't train her to be a poultry specialist like Darren. So you know, they don't have that kind of knowledge that you have. and yet they need to intervene. And so I think it would be important to manage to get them to be involved and be part of discussion. I think that might help for the future to improve or to find ways to make things more palatable, more doable.
I'd love to, maybe what we do is as an industry have that institutional memory posited within someone who stays on the feather side and goes to CFIA, because the way they cycle in and out, they'll have some institutional memory and then they're off and gone, and then they forget. And I hear in BC, they had everything figured out, and then it was all new people and they're doing all the same silly things over again. So that's when the egg farmers stepped up and just said, listen, we'll tell you how it works. And they're like, you know how it works? We're like, yeah, actually went through this about 10 years ago. So then they educated and we're able to continue to educate. So it's really up to us to have the solutions to our problems.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where you just gotta be really nice. There's honey and there's vinegar,
but
honey works really good, and vinegar, it's not.
But I see. Yeah. But you have two levels. You have the people who you may have met from CFIA who have empathy, and they don't want to be a pain. They're really trying to help. And then you have the leadership of CFIA. They're not necessarily bad people, but sometimes they have other priorities, or and so the problem is certainly not at the level of the individuals you've been working with on farms, but sometimes there's a problem with the leadership. In 2004, when BC got hit, we had at CFIA a vet with a lot of experience. Okay, we started looking at what was being done and felt that it made no sense. Okay, and at that time, the president of CFIA was a lawyer, and he was behaving like one. And this guy spoke up, and he was sent on a mission to Kazakhstan. Okay, I'm not making this up. This is real. So they could not fire him, but they sure could take care of him. Okay, that's problematic. We need to find a way to have an impact at the level of the leadership of CFIA, because as you mentioned, your average CFIA person who gets in when there's an issue, they want to help. They're good people. That's for sure.
I think too, I'm just going to quickly put in a plug there, like the emergency management teams, both in BC and Alberta and Saskatchewan. Those are the ones that I've gotten to work with. Those are your go-to in your boards, like Susan or Stephen or Rob, everybody. Those people really do well advocating for you if you have AI or if you're just in the industry. And that emergency management team, they meet every day during an outbreak, and they go through the list of everybody that has AI and where they're at in their outbreak and what needs to get done, and if you have any concerns. So there is that too. There is this whole other team. And then now there's this new role in Alberta, the liaison role, where you can have somebody specifically from your board that speaks for you. So you don't have to sit down in those terrible meetings sometimes that are never ending. You can keep doing what you do best, which is taking care of your farm. And there's people that advocate for you to the CFIA.
All right, I'm just going to sneak in one more because it did come up and kind of in our discussions too. In your international travels, JP, are there things that other countries are doing that maybe we could learn from, or that we're still not quite doing here? Are there any of these practices that you've seen in your travels that, boy, we sure need to take another look at here in Canada?
Yeah, there are a few things. The first one is new buildings, new farms. Before a decision is made to approve a new farm or a new building, of course, there's some stuff about the environment, but now they also look at the risk that this will represent in terms of infectious disease transmission and all this. And so they would not, for example, allow a turkey farm to be built, within a kilometer of a breeder farm, stuff like that. We have no such rules in Canada, and that's been a problem. In Ontario, in 2015, they actually had a great great-grandparent stock being hit by a breeder farm that was built with the winds going straight about 800 meters away, and they both got the disease. And the argument at that time, because it went to court, was well, the guy who built close to grandparent stock, did he follow the Canadian standards for biosecurity? And yeah, but then I said, the Canadian standards, by the way, they were written for a one size fits all from a backyard flock to a 1 million egg layer operation. Okay. And so it does not address the reality of today. So Australia, Italy now are not allowing people to build wherever they want. They certainly look at the complexity or the risk, relative risk of adding in a certain region. The French right now, they've been hit so many times since 2015. They've realized that a lot of their problems come from the fact, first of all, that they have outside operations, like, the birds can go out, and it's a strong tradition. They cannot totally stop that, so they're working on finding ways to minimize contact between wild birds and domestic birds, with all sorts of things, including some nets that they would put on top of birds being outside and all this. They are also seriously considering not allowing adding farms or even maintaining some productions in some key places where they've had repeated problems, in particular with the ducks. Okay, so to give you an idea, you have the southwest of France, a lot of duck production. Okay, 64 million for foie gras there. And then you have the Brittany, where it's like traditional turkey, commercial turkey, like we know it here. And the virus has been having fun going in between. And so they're going to go with a strategy of vaccination, strategic vaccination, but they're also seriously considering reducing the density of poultry farms in a few areas. Okay, that's drastic. But in the United States, in North Carolina in the 90s, we had poultry mortality syndrome. It was infectious disease. We could not control it with traditional biosecurity, and it went away when we lost 35% of the farms, of the production. They shifted from turkey production to chicken production. It's not as if they removed the farms, but they got rid of the host, okay? And as they reduced the density, the problem kind of went away, okay? So the managing poultry in a post-AI world, I think in high density regions, we need to look at, put everything on the table, essentially. We're there with this particular situation.
Some sobering words, but definitely mind expanding, and it's great to be able to tap into your valuable international perspective to hear some of those things. Well, I'm looking at the clock, and I know that we need to move on, but I really thank each of you for your important perspectives, and it's been a really eye-opening discussion. So thank you very much. Let's hear it one more time for Mike Froese and Taryn Gerard and JP Valancourt for sharing their perspectives with us.